Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Black Health Trust. We're so happy that you chose to spend this hour with us, and we are going to have a very important discussion about two really major issues that affect our community. And we will, at the end of this talk, I trust, have some ideas as to how we can combat it in our community. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our founder, Dr. Randall Maxey.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barbara Neighbor-Stevens. Hello, Dr. Walks and Dr. Hines, and our other co-host, Dr. Lawson. We do have a talk today that we will try to keep on a very practical level and see how it can affect us. But I want to say that, especially Dr. Walks, I went to church and I sat on the front row today, and the sermon talked about keeping your camp together. And it talked about how Jesus in the 40 days before he was to get on the cross, instead of coming down on I started to say Russians, the Romans, he decided that he needed to pay attention to his team and get his house in order. And given our current situation in the United States, I think we as a people need to get our house in order and be self-sufficient. We see that all kinds of things are coming against our medical schools, our medical students, our work, our health, that we have to get it together. We have to have our camp in order. Let's go with the first slide, Simon. I'm going to give a talk on high blood pressure. And even though we've talked about it before, I'm going to talk about managing high blood pressure in African Americans. Go to the next slide, if you would, please. And I'm going to ask my co-moderators to help me as we go along. So what is high blood pressure? It's a condition where blood pressure, it has a pressure against the arteries that's too high. It's also known as a silent killer due to a lack of symptoms. And it can lead to a stroke, heart disease, or kidney failure. And going back to the first point where it says it's pressure against the arteries. And Barbara, I don't know if you remember back when we worked in the lab together when I was a fellow, if you had blood pressure in a tube or in a vessel, as the pressure went against that vessel, it would increase the volume. And as that vessel became fatter, like in atherosclerosis or having hardening of the arteries, the pressure became more. So this means that not only is it something that moves in a square, but it's something that the more narrow that blood vessel becomes with lipids or with fat, the more the pressure goes up. So it multiplies it by a factor of 2, and then it squares. Next slide. So there's a prevalence and a risk that happens in African Americans. 56% of African American adults are affected by high blood pressure. And a large number of those people, at least 50% of those people, don't even know it. They don't know it. And also, it develops more early and more severely in African Americans than it does in the general population. And salt sensitivity and lifestyle factors increase risk. Now, what is salt sensitivity and why do we have it? We know that most of us have ancestors that came across not on the Mayflower, but on what we call the Middle Passage in slavery. And many of those people died on the way across. And it selected out those that survived had a special ability to hold on to salt. And that was good for survival during the Middle Passage. But it was a problem now that we sit on our couches and look at our TVs and eat. That salt sensitivity can be bad because the salt seeps into the blood vessel wall. And like I said on the first slide, it makes it fatter and larger, and that does what? It increases the pressure. Next slide. So what are the treatment guidelines? The first line medications are usually thought to be thiazide diuretics. and calcium channel blockers. And there's some controversy around that, but given that much of the food that we eat tends to have salt in it, and that tends to saturate the blood vessels and make them fatter and increase the pressure, it may be a good idea to use a water pill, thiazide diuretic. There's clothalidone, hydrochlorothiazide, etc., and that makes you urinate out a lot of that excess water. Lifestyle changes equally are critical in diet, exercise is important, and stress reduction. And since I went to church, one of the things the pastor said today, God will never send you stress. So it must come from somewhere else. Next slide, let's slide. So the DASH diet, which is dietary approaches to stop hypertension. This diet is a diet of fruit, vegetables, low fat, dairy, low fat dairy diet, and low sodium. Exercise is important, at least 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And also limit alcohol and quit smoking. We talked before about both alcohol. There's no good amount of alcohol. You can't drink alcohol and be healthy, but some people say if you drink red wine, it's better than some other things. I don't know what they serve it for communion at my church, but at my church it's grape juice. And also, there's no reason to smoke at all. There's no good thing to say about smoking or vaping or anything. Next slide. So a high sodium intake increases blood pressure. The goal is to have less than 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day. And common sources are processed foods, canned soups, snacks. So it's very important to read your labels. And we talked about not having ultra processed foods in the past. Next slide. Potassium. That's a protective mineral. So potassium helps balance sodium effects. The goal is 3,500 to 4,700 milligrams per day. The sources of that are bananas, spinach, sweet potatoes, especially things like roasted sweet potatoes, spinach and salads, or even a cooked. And it's the pot liquor and spinach and greens that has a lot of potassium in it. And bananas are good as well. Next slide. So cholesterol, lipids, and heart health. High LDL, that's low density lipoprotein. That's the bad cholesterol. That's linked to heart attacks and strokes. And we want your LDL to be less than 100. When you look at your laboratory, it should be less than 100. Lower LDL is important to have a high HDL, high density lipoprotein. That is the good cholesterol, and that helps to go up if you have extra. I can look at a patient lab and tell if the HDL is 25 or 30. I know they're not doing any walking except to the refrigerator and back. Avoid fried foods, fast foods, and high fat dairy. So if you do drink milk, and some of you are not allergic to lactose, drink low fat milk, 2% or reduced fat milk. Next slide. Trans fats and processed foods. So trans fats increase LDL and decrease HDL. It's found in margarine, packaged foods, fried fast food. The goal is to completely eliminate trans fats from your diet. And one of the ways you can tell trans fat is you can't see through it. Like you can't see through margarine. That's a trans fat. Next slide. So calories and sugar content, there's hidden dangers in that. Excess calories lead to weight gain, hypertension risk, sugary foods and drinks spike insulin and pressure. And we know that every time that sugar spikes, insulin goes up. And when insulin goes up, insulin is actually toxic in some senses and also makes you gain weight as well. And that increases your blood pressure. So we also want to limit sugars to less than 6% of your daily calories. Next slide. So common meals. So I know my favorite food is grits, but 1 cup of grits equals 180 calories. It's low in fiber and low in potassium, but it tastes good, especially if you put some good old butter on it. So I'm telling you, limit your grits and the way we eat it. French fries has 365 calories. It's high in sodium and high in fat. Bacon is good as it tastes. 2 slices of cured bacon is 87 calories apiece, has high sodium, has fat, and has nitrates in it, which are bad. Nitrates are carcinogenic. If it's uncured bacon, it has a lower sodium but it's still high in saturated fat. So again, grits and bacon and fries are not the best for you. Next slide. So cooking methods that we want to avoid: deep frying, heavy salt seasoning, smoking of cured meats especially, and the way we barbecue puts toxic measures into your meat, even though it tastes so good. You want to limit your fried chicken, bacon, salted fish, and I know I eat Jamaican food and they have something called sawfish. It means salted fish, but it's so good. And you want to eliminate processed meats, especially. Uh, Prefer baking, grilling, steaming, or air frying. Next slide. So, healthy alternatives to the above: roasted sweet potatoes instead of fries. Use turkey bacon or plant-based alternatives. Flavor with herbs, garlic, lemons instead of salt. Next slide. So, how do we have better outcomes? You want to control your blood pressure through medications and lifestyle changes. You want to advocate for health equity despite so-called DEI, and on the CNN it says a DEI, DUI policy changes. Empower communities through education and support. Next slide. So, in terms of questions and discussion, we know that high blood pressure is a sign that can cause many problems, especially strokes, heart failure, heart attacks. But it all starts with what we've been talking about for several months now: the way you eat. Elijah Muhammad once said, "What you eat, you are what you eat." So thank you very much. I'll entertain any discussion and questions that people have. We'll start with Dr. Neighbor Stevens.
Well, I am so happy that we're having this conversation. I always like the practical, and we're starting a very practical conversation. But I think we need to probably push it a bit more. For one thing, and I'm not holding this against you, but I feel like this talk was addressing adults. And on this subject, I want to be loud and clear. Hypertension is not just a disease of adults. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more children with hypertension, and there are lots of theories and thoughts about why that is so. It is probably linked to some extent to genetic predisposition. It is probably linked to some degree to the huge epidemic of obesity that we have in our children in this country. It is a lifestyle issue for children. Children, and we can go through the litany of the reasons why, but children don't play. outside. Children spend way too much time on the screen. And it is important to exercise, as you mentioned, for adults, at least 30 minutes a day. More than that, much more than that for kids. And then kids need to sleep. Adults don't sleep enough in general, and children are not sleeping enough in general. So we've got lifestyle issues, we've got social determinants of health issues, we've got genetic issues. But at the end of the day, our kids are coming up with high blood pressure. And we talk about high rates of Black maternal mortality. One of the major contributors to that is going into a pregnancy with high blood pressure and other things. So being a pediatrician, I'm a advocate of prevention. Um, so the time to start is now. And you want to instill these principles in your children because by and large, unless there's some things that really keep them from doing it, what you teach them when they're young, they tend to follow it when they're older. They may veer away and test the waters for a minute, but they come back to what they see what you were saying made sense. So I just want to put that plug in for high blood pressure or hypertension in our young people. And when I say our young people, now there's the rare one for various reasons that may have it under 12, but we really start picking it up by the time they're 12.
Thank you so much. One thing I mentioned on what you say, we know that a lot is on the environment, what you eat, the way you live. But there's also some studies that show that if you were to do a biopsy of blood vessels in an infant, those blood vessels from parents that have high blood pressure are actually thicker. The endothelium is thicker. So there's is a big genetic component as well. The other thing I would say as a child, I remember wanting to be big enough I didn't have to take a nap. But I wish I did take a nap because that sleeping part that you mentioned is very important. And I wanted so much to grow up so I didn't have to take naps anymore. Now I'm recommending that everybody take naps and get more hours of sleep. That's very important. But any of other moderators, Dr. Walks, any comments or thoughts?
Oh, uh, Dr. Maxey, I have a lot of comments, and first of all, thank you for bringing this up. It's we tend to say, oh well, we talked about that. But people continue to not act on things. Dr. Neighbor Stevens reminds us all the time that common sense is not that common, and sometimes you have to continue to take a life or death message to folks. And this really is a life or death message. It is so important that folks try to maintain health. Dr. Neighbor Stevens will tie prevention to pediatrics. You know, as an adult, the main difference between kids and adults is I remember being a kid. It wasn't yesterday, but I remember if I heard something, it got better right away. Things don't get better as well as we get older. And so if we get in the habit of keeping ourselves healthy, we don't have to try to get in the habit when we get older. The other comment that I want to make is when we think about high blood pressure and we talk about things that may increase high blood pressure, there's a lot that can be influenced beyond the diet and the exercise. Life is kind of challenging these days for a lot of people. Kids notice when parents are stressed out about what's happening in their lives. A lot of folks, not just in the Washington, D.C. area, but around the country, are losing their jobs with a lot of the federal government slashing that's going on. I was on my way to church in a good mood this morning until my wife shared with me that they were beginning to take exhibits out of the African American Museum, and that made my blood pressure go up. There's so much that is coming directly at us right now. I don't know how you have an African American museum if you don't want to have African American information in it. But it's part of the Smithsonian, which we thought would make it in, which would ensconce it in American culture. But what it did is it made it vulnerable to somebody who decided they wanted to mess with it. So a lot of our, when you talk about our various African American communities, we get hit from a lot of different sides. We really, really do. And so I think us finding a way to lower our stress level. I talk to patients about all the things that we hear about, but I don't think hear about often enough. All of the therapy, the mindfulness, the relaxation techniques, the breathing techniques, the getting up and going for a walk, maybe not an aerobic, I'm going to burn some calories walk, but maybe a relaxing walk outside to get away from. Don't watch the news all day, every day. It's just there are so many things we have to do with respect to self-care that aren't only how we eat and how we move, but also how we take in or refuse to take in all of the, they should just stop calling it the news and start calling it the bad news, or start calling it the difficult news, or start calling the it's going to make your blood pressure raise news, because so much of what's going on around us is completely working us in the wrong direction. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Dr. Jocelyn Hines, how are you?
Hello. I'm great. How are you?
Good.
You know, when you were talking about getting back to basics, one of the things that came to mind was I recently had a conversation about with someone who had been resistant to getting their high blood pressure addressed, and they have genuine bona fide high blood pressure. They came back from the doctor with some medications that were to work on the fluid and that their, vessels were too tight. And they came away with the understanding that they don't have high blood pressure because it wasn't high blood pressure medicine. It was medicine to get rid of the fluid and to make the vessels relax. So I just wanted to take the time to just speak to, or have you speak to all the different strategies that we use to tackle high blood pressure, whether it is making the pump work more effectively and dealing with, all of those kinds of things still mean that you have high blood pressure. And I think fundamentally, when you don't want something to be true, you'll find all kinds of ways, for for it to, meet your mindset. But if you could just take a minute to address the different strategies that we use to target high blood pressure.
Okay. I remember learning the formula when I was in medical school, maybe high school, I don't know. And that formula is blood pressure is equal to stroke volume times total peripheral resistance, or how tight your blood vessel, how much your blood vessels are squeezing. Break that down a little bit more. Stroke volume is equal to heart rate times the volume of fluid pumped with each heartbeat times total peripheral resistance. Again, how much resistance there is in the blood vessels. If any one of those things goes up or down, it affects your blood pressure. So let's take each one. If you have more volume than you need because you have more water, that affects your stroke volume. And that can lead to a stretching of the heart, as in left ventricular, or the bottom of the heart having been larger, it gets stretched out. The next one, the heart rate, is actually whether if your heart is beating too fast, and the heart rate in white people tends to be faster in the sense of hypertension, and the cause of hypertension more than the heart rate in black people. And I'm going to get back to that in just a moment. The fact that we talked about, and again, I refer to Dr. Neighbor Stevens, there's something called the law of Laplace. And that law says that if fluid is moving through a tube, like your blood vessels, and the wall of that blood vessel gets thicker and presses that fluid down, that makes the pressure high. in a doubling fashion. For every extra milligram of pressure, it raises that pressure up one way or the other. So now let's take the medications that affect those things. The water pills, the chlorothalidone or the thiazide, gets rid of volume caused by extra sodium. So that helps you pee it out, so to speak. And that decreases the unnecessary volume of blood. And that extra volume of blood or water can get into your lungs and cause what we call pulmonary edema. The other thing that we use something called beta blockers. Beta blockers slow down the heart rate, and that helps that heart rate part of the formula lower, so blood pressure is lower. But there's some cautions I want to give for Black people and all people. Beta blockers should not be a first line of treatment unless you're treating somebody after they've had a heart attack or myocardial infarction. But there are newer drugs that are beta blockers that are better than some of the old ones that we used to have. But the mainstay that I like to use are so-called calcium channel blockers. And these calcium channel blockers tend to relax blood vessels, and they do something in the kidney in terms of affecting the blood that goes into the kidney and comes out of the kidney, in terms of making there be less resistance inside the glomerulus. And that affects something called angiotensin. But the real drugs are called RAAS drugs. That's ACE inhibitors and also angiotensin receptor blocking agent. And these actually cause the blood vessels to dilate. They also affect the kidneys in a way that they dilate the blood vessels that leave the glomerulus, leave the kidney, and that makes the blood pressure relax as well. So what science has taught us is that it is better to use a combination of drugs rather than individual drugs. And by a combination, I mean drugs in one pill. So you might have an ACE inhibitor and a diuretic in the same pill, or an ACE inhibitor and a calcium channel blocker in one pill, because you don't want to take 400 different medicines. But for the average Black person, it takes anywhere from 2 to 4 types of medication working, so you can stay less than the side effect profile to get that pressure down. And also research has shown that it takes about 2.5 times more blood pressure medicine to control blood pressure in Black Americans than it does in the general population. So I hope that addresses some of your question. But a lot of this can be solved with eating a low salt diet, low fat diet, and it tends to address all of those problems.
That was great. And then I do have one more of the things that I commonly hear, right? Is I'm older, my blood pressure doesn't have to be that low. So can you speak to some, because there are some differences, but I think people are giving themselves a little too much grace in the space for the blood pressure recommendations for by age.
So the part that impressed me about the latest guidelines, there are no special guidelines for older people. It's shown that if your blood pressure is over 120/80, that is the first level of high blood pressure, which is set 1. There's a 64% level of increased strokes, heart attacks that happen if that blood pressure is over 120/80. So even if you have pressure of 140, 145, 150, that is not good. Now, the only time I think you let your blood pressure go up a little, if a person is sundowning, when that pressure gets so low that the pressure head is not applying the brain with good blood flow. For some of those people, you have to manage very carefully how you lower their blood pressure, because they may fall out on you. But that's something between you and your provider. But the increased statistics of having untoward events happens at a number above 120/80. So there is no pass. And I hate it when I get a patient from a white doctor, white hospital, and they say, "Oh, it's okay for you to have higher blood pressure. You're Black." That irks me to know, because they're just increasing people who die. Any other thoughts?
And Dr. Maxey, they're not they're not increasing people who die necessarily on purpose. It's just these kinds of thought processes have just been in the culture. These are
Mhm.
as Dr. Hines was saying, folks will hear that. Dr. Maxey, can you address the fact that I know that you're a very young man, and so this is not an issue for you, but some of us who are not quite as young, you give us a diuretic, we're trying not to go to the bathroom already for a variety of other reasons. And
Mm.
so if you give a man a medicine that's going to make him urinate more often, um, then we worry about things like folks having, folks passing out because blood pressure is now too low or they're dehydrated. And it's not as simple as keep living your life and take your medicine, is it?
No. Uh, there are two phases of your question. One I'm going to talk about, you didn't imply, but it used to be the medication that we use for high blood pressure would cause what we call erectile dysfunction. Most of those drugs are not being used anymore, so very rarely does that happen in a normal situation. But if you understand that what causes hardening of the arteries and plaques, if it hardens in your heart and in your arm, guess where else it's going to happen? It's going to happen in the sexual organs too. So you can have sexual dysfunction from the things that give you hypertension, the high LDL. It's not just heart attacks, it can cause a private attack, if I can use that word since it's Sunday. That the same thing that's happening in your eyes and your blood vessels and your kidney is going to be happening every place in your body. The other part is there are two types of diuretic. There's a hydrochlorothiazide, chlorothalidone, which are long acting, maybe 24 hours each. You take them once a day. Then there's a stronger one, which is called a loop diuretic, like Lasix, and it has an action that lasts about 30 minutes. So I would say for people who are worried about peeing all night, the Lasix might be good to take in the morning. You can get your urination out of the way during the daytime, and if you eat a low salt diet, you're not going to be up all night long. Also, if you have what they call kidney failure, mild kidney failure, CKD, uh, at a certain level, the hydrochlorothiazide, chlorothalidone won't act at all. So you have to use Lasix, and you might have to use it more than once a day. So that might solve that. And a lot of people say that they don't drink during the day because they don't want to pee. That can also cause kidney damage. So you'll make sure you stay well hydrated. It's important to have water moving through your body. You just don't want excess to be kept in because of increased sodium. So everything is a balance. How you eat, what you put in your body. You should be drinking at least 1.5 to 2,000 liters of water per day. That's very important because you lose water every time you talk and you breathe. You lose about 1.5 liters a day. So you got to replace that. And then you add what you urinate. So you got to keep hydrated. It's a balancing act that you have to do.
Dr. Maxey, Dr. Kerwin Dawes wants to make a comment. While she is being unmuted, I'd like to respond to one of two questions that, at this point, one question, and I'll come back on the second one if time allows, which flows into what you're talking about. So the question is about what happened when they went to the doctor and there was a trend of higher blood potassium levels. And the questioner told the doctor that it was due to high consumption of kale, avocado, spinach, bananas, and supplements. And so their plan is to not consume as much of those entities before they have their next round of blood work. I'd like for you to comment on that. My comment on that, I'm concerned by this comment because there is a certain amount of manipulation going on that is not necessarily going to help get to the root of the problem. Now,
Okay.
the supplements, add a whole nother degree to this. But if you were just having a diet of kale, avocado, spinach, bananas, Your body should be able, if your body is functioning right, you should be able to manage your potassium level. And so if that was what you were consuming without the supplements and you were having a high potassium level, then that needs to be investigated because that should be something that your body could handle. But I'll turn it over to you.
It tells you automatically. I'd first say that person has some form of kidney disease. The body is very perfect about the way it manages your fluid and your electrolytes, your potassium, your sodium. And so this person probably has some degree of chronic kidney disease to raise that potassium. That's the only thing that would raise it. Like people do all this stuff like drink alkaline water, which is useless because you cannot change your pH in a healthy way by drinking alkaline water. The body buffers won't allow that to happen. So if a person comes to you with high potassium, something's wrong in the body. It's not because of you're taking supplements unless you're overdosing on them. So that doctor needs to do a test to see if there's good kidney function. They need to know what the aldosterone, the adrenal glands in the body are doing. There's something wrong with that person that needs to be further investigated. You're absolutely right.
Would you also add the caveat of also unless there are medications that are also potentially playing a factor in there too?
That would be true, but not as much. The body can handle most things unless you're unless you're drinking potassium, unless you're overdosing on bananas and chocolate. The kidneys can handle almost any normal load that you put in. But like we say, common sense, if you're overdosing, it's going to be high. But supplements typically don't, most people don't even need supplements. You know, if they're eating a good balanced diet, supplements are basically BS.
Not to deviate, but I just have a general question for the consensus for the group since we kind of delved into supplements. So that's how I was trained too, right? Like if you're eating a balanced diet, then you don't really need supplements. But how many of us are really eating a truly balanced diet, especially nowadays? I feel like, there was probably a time when that was probably more prevalent, but I mean, I think there's probably more people than we realize not eating an actually balanced diet. What do y'all think?
Well, I'm looking at what we've been talking about for the past few months. We've been talking about one, trying to eat less, right? We've been talking about eating less frequently. We've been talking about fasting more. Most of us eat too much, you know, and I think part of our problem is eating more than we should, even if it's steaks, shrimp, and fish. So I think if we eat, I don't know what a balanced diet is anymore.
The point though, right? Like that's the point. I think many of us have lost track because there's a different recommendation, there's a different fad, there's a different strategy. I think lots of us have lost track of wait, where was the balance again? Right.
Well, and another part of that, this is really a very useful thing to spend time on. What is a balanced diet? There are many communities where food is not as available that we would consider healthy, and we want you to eat more of this. And if you have limited resources, sometimes the filling but unhealthy food is affordable for folks. And my last little comment is this. I see Dr. Kervin Dawes is ready to talk. There was a story on the news a week ago. I think it was a school shooting or something like that, and they wouldn't release the kids early to the parents. And one of the officials said, "We won't release them until we finish all of the lunch periods, and then and that's what they did. They finished serving all the kids lunch, and then they let the parents pick them up." And one parent was outraged. "I don't care about lunch. I want to pick up my kid." And it occurred to me that for a lot of these kids, the only place they get a quote unquote balanced meal, or sometimes even a full meal, is that lunch period at school. So they didn't say that as part of the news story, but just having been in this area for a while, I said, wow, you know, you're worried about your kid, but some of those parents were like, I hope they get that food because it matters
Yeah.
a lot.
Well,
So
that's true.
I'll leave
Let
it
me,
there.
before Dr. Kervin Doll speaks, I want to make sure that she gives me her recipe for what I talk about, codfish, ackee, and saltfish.
What you
Ackee,
know,
ackee and codfish. Yeah.
what you're trying to say is sawfish and dry food, or sawfish and provision. That's
Okay.
what I want to refer
We
to.
call it ackee and saltfish.
No,
Well,
Aki's different.
Mhm.
well, actually, that's the national food for Jamaica, ackee and saltfish. So, but it's quite easy to make. I was listening to your comments. I would say we are a little more careful, especially in the summertime, with diuretics, because we do have more syncope with people getting dehydrated in the summer. The other problem that, and actually I teach this to my med students, that you have to be very careful on giving people diuretics as part of their main part of their blood pressure medicine in Jamaica. And this is strictly cultural, in that we don't have good bathroom places outside of your home. So what we found is people's blood pressures are well controlled if we have them in hospital, but when they come to clinic, we're having issues. And you ask them when they come to clinic, you took your medicine? Oh, we didn't take the water pill. We didn't take the mixture with the water pill because I was coming to clinic, and we have transportation, and we won't take that when we go out of our house because
Good point.
they want to use only their own bathrooms. And it is true, a lot of our bathrooms outside our house is dirty. So we actually calculated if somebody isn't going to take their blood pressure medicine 3 to 4 times a week, we're treating ourselves more than themselves, more than the patient themselves. So we also accommodate for that. But we also back off things seasonal in Jamaica, which you probably don't do. So for in our summers, a lot of us back down on our diuretics because
Excellent point, Dr. Dawn. Excellent point.
but we also do that for many medicines. Our diabetic medicines in mango season, we all give them a way of going up on their medicines, even though we do, because they are going to eat mangoes and regulate it. So not just for blood pressure, but for diabetes, we regulate according to what's going on in the culture at that time. So for a lot of the fruits and for what are the heat that we're having, we may back off. I know in the US, when I watch the news, in your summers, you're having more dehydration now too in the elderly. True or not true?
That's true. Now, in my practice, Dr. Dawes, I rarely use diuretics. I use mainly calcium channel blockers and angiotensin receptor blockade. Rarely do I have to use diuretics in my patients.
That's what we teach. That's what we teach here. But for the guidelines for my med students boards, it still says first lines for Black people are diuretics or calcium channel blockers. So that's still in the guidelines. So when I do teach that, I just say, well, back here in Jamaica, this is what we do. We do less of it and why.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump wrote part of those guidelines.
Also, I don't know about there, but in Jamaica, problem we're having now is a lot of our elderly are living at home by themselves.
Yes, that is a big problem here too.
And you have to therefore be also a little, at least I am not as tight with those elderly living home by themselves. I don't find that they eat as well as they should. And in one of the things when we're sending home people both for diabetes and hypertension, one of the questions we ask, do you live alone? Who fixes your food? Because we have to take that into account as well.
Yeah. Let me bring up something that I want to say, and this is sort of personal, but I'm going to put it out there. So a year or so ago, I had some protein in my urine, which means it's a form of kidney problem that I was having myself. And I started taking some drugs, one called Ozempic, one called Farxiga, and one called Corindia. And I took my lab last week, a week ago, and I have no protein whatsoever in my urine. And many people use some of these drugs to lose weight. But more than that, these drugs stop cardiovascular disease, brain disease, heart disease, kidney disease, and it tracks by decreasing the inflammation. So I want to encourage people that these are not just drugs for obesity. I'm not obese, but these can help. There are many new drugs that are out now. Some of them are a little bit pricey, but sometimes your insurance will pay for it. But consider that if you urinate, and when you urinate, you see a lot of foam, that's a sign that you could have an excess amount of protein in your urine. So ask your doctor if any of those newer drugs are appropriate for you, even if you're not obese, but if you show signs of other cardiovascular disease and kidney disease. And I'm a living testimony that they work.
Yes, they do work. We are seeing reversal here with them, but they are pricey for us too. Not as expensive as in the US. They are available here, but they're still fairly expensive.
Very good. Anything else in the chat, Dr. Neighbor Stevens?
Can I make one more comment? I didn't say anything much on the supplements, but I do think, I do believe in some supplements. I don't think the soil that our food grows in is as good. And I mean, we have tested some of our soil to Jamaica because there's nothing about adding back in. I'm not sure if that's going to work as well. I also, when I do track myself, I have to take magnesium all the time. If I don't, my magnesium levels fall. Maybe you can tell me why that is so. And I do drink coconut water, bananas, but I do have to take extra magnesium. If I don't, I can tell because I'll start getting cramps. Once it's up to normal, it's okay. And there are a few supplements that I think are helpful as we age. I know the omega-3s, but there are some I think we should. And in some of the medicines we give our people, say CoQ10 gets used up with some of our statins. So in some of the medicines we use, you have to be careful. And I do think for some things we should supplement. Personal opinion. Our foods are not as good as it was 100 years ago.
Mhm.
And we ain't picking cotton now either.
True.
All right. Thank you again. Well, let's ask for our final comments our concluding comments, Dr. Walks, not final.
Thank you.
Dr. Hines.
Well, thank you, Dr. Maxey, for bringing us back to the basics and talking about, the importance of hypertension and treatment. And I think you gave us a really good, not just reminder and overview, but added some, context to this discussion, led to some context into ways that we can, manage our blood pressure, manage compliance, and as always, address how our diet is impacting our health. So thank you for today's discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. Dr. Walks, my personal psychiatrist.
Yes, I am failing mightily, but I will continue to work with you, Dr. Maxey. No, I think that when we talk about back to basics and we talk about common sense, I think it's useful to say to people, look at what you're putting out. If somebody's blowing their nose and they have allergies and it's just kind of clear and what have you, don't worry about it. You start getting some dark yellow and some green stuff, it's probably not your allergies. If like Dr. Maxey said, if you're urinating and you see a lot of foam, it's worth a question to your doctor. Also, I think that your urine is supposed to be, just a little straw color and almost kind of clear. If it's dark yellow, you need to do something a little different. Maybe drink a little bit more water or a lot more water. But just look at what's coming out of your body as we look at what's going into our body. You shouldn't have runny bowel movements every day, all day. There's just some of these sort of normal, I can tell something isn't exactly as it should be. Those are things we should know. What does my urine look like? What is my what's in the toilet look like when I have a BM? Turn around and take a look. And what am I coughing out? What am I blowing out of my nose? Just be aware that you are getting indications of maybe you need to ask some other questions.
Thank you, Dr. Walks. Dr. Neighbor Stevens.
I'm trying to think how to say this in a politically correct way. And
There
I think
isn't one. Go ahead.
yeah, I think I can use this as an example. What we've been talking about are very practical, basic points that have stood the test of time. When you start hearing things coming from official sources and they don't sound right, they probably aren't, but they're certainly worth the question. So I'd like to encourage our audience, and I'll use this example. Last year, I think it was, it's 25 years, last year, there was a lot of rightful outrage about a law put in place denying people in Florida break time when it was hot, water breaks and cooling periods. And this applied to people working out on the highways, wherever. And those of you know how hot it can get in Florida in the summer, and to have people outside, the people working on the in food production, the field hands, they were not going to give them time to have breaks. And so rightful outrage blew up because this was a invitation for serious health consequences. So when you start hearing stuff in your community, like I said before, that just doesn't sound right, don't accept it without questioning it and pushing against it and testing it. And I think this kind of dutiful questioning is what we're going to have to do now, because there's a lot of stuff being said and done that is not accurate or correct.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Barbara Davis Stevens. And as my final closing comment, I just want to call attention that the current U.S. government official is encouraging people not to believe what they see, hear, and experience. They're experiencing lying, telling you the sky is red when it's blue. So, as all of our co-moderators said, think for yourself, be observant, take care of your family, take care of yourself, and this too will pass sooner rather than later, I'm hoping. Everybody have a great Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you, Simon, for your help.
Good day, everyone.
Bye.
Mm.